Yeah, this is what I really am excited to see because I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of what this K-State team as a whole basically is. And I'm really interested because you brought up the defensive facts, right? And the basic fact that Oklahoma should have a field day. Here's the thing. Like, when I'm watching that K-State versus Arkansas State game live, I'm sitting to myself thinking, these K-State cornerbacks are not getting just flat out burned. Like, they're in the mix, but it's just a matter of fact that they were getting beat in competitive plays, and Jonathan Adams Jr. was just making them look silly with some of these incredible contested catches. Like, K-State cornerbacks were there, and I think when you talk about a defensive scheme under new defensive coordinator Joe Klanderman that wants to be quote-unquote aggressive, my big thing here is, okay, if Kansas State cornerbacks, from my perspective, and you could have a disagreement here, but from my perspective, if K-State cornerbacks were in position to make plays, and they just didn't make them in those competitive situations, and Joe Klanderman hasn't necessarily revealed the entirety of his quote-unquote aggressive schematics, I mean, what is Oklahoma in here for? This is, to me, a brand new slate when it comes to OU's offense versus K-State defense, because you're talking about Spencer Rattler at quarterback, who's going to go brand new into the situation, basically starting clean at running back. The offensive line is back for sure, but hey, man, Wyatt Hubert has a chance to be really special in this game, and I think we'll touch on some of the matchups we're keeping an eye on moving forward. But my big thing here is, okay, if Kansas State saved all of its plans for this Oklahoma game, and those cornerbacks were still able to just show at least some sort of resistance even in a losing effort, like, is this a matchup that we're kind of sleeping on? Because Klanderman was an in-house hire. He was promoted from the defensive back positioning. And I think for him to be a guy who witnessed what took place last year in Manhattan and to understand what worked and didn't work, even though, hey, man, we talk about Alex Grinch giving up 48 points. I mean, what did Oklahoma end up scoring offensively? 45, something crazy? I mean, this, to me, is just a brand new game when it comes to K-State defense versus Oklahoma offense. And I'm really wanting to see what this K-State defensive unit actually is, because I don't think we saw completely what they're made of in that opener against Arkansas State.
They put up 41 against Scotty Hazelton's defense. Scotty Hazelton, like Klanderman, came from North Dakota State. Hazelton is now defensive coordinator at Michigan State. I'm actually really excited to see what they look like because Mel Tucker's the head coach, and they're going to hang their hat on defense. But to Klanderman, I think they're just going to run what they've been running. Like, this is a group of coaches that believe in themselves, right? Like, Courtney Messingham, we thought last year would have been on the hot seat, and then his offense puts up 48 on Oklahoma, which in 2019 is still kind of a feat, right? It's not the feat that it might have been in 2019, but let's not pretend that Iowa State didn't put up 41 or that LSU didn't put up 63. However, I think you make a point in that everybody's turning over their personnel. So I think that the coaches know what they're looking at, but do the players know what they're looking at? Do they understand what Oklahoma wants to do offensively? And does Oklahoma understand what Kansas State wants to do defensively? Because I think the same tenets of Kansas State football that were in place in the Bill Snyder era still apply in the Chris Kleiman era, which is to say we're not going to beat ourselves. We're not going to pick up a bunch of penalties. We're going to tackle, we're going to wrap up, and we're going to put you on the ground. And if we're able to do that, we get you in the third and long situations. We like our chances there. And on the money downs, that's where I think Kansas State has a chance to stay in this game. Because if you're forcing Rattler to throw the ball, great, right? I mean, that's what you were going to want to do, because if you let Oklahoma run the ball, they're going to throw it anywhere they want to, whenever they want to. The best you can hope for is to be able to guess accurately whether or not it's a run or pass situation. On third and short, you don't know what you're going to get. And in the age where we're seeing more coaches depend on the analytics of what they should be doing on fourth down, depending on down and distance and how close you are to your own goal line, I would not put it past a Lincoln Riley to go for it on fourths in some instances. So again, you just want to get them in third and long situations, which means you got to stuff the run, which means you probably have to devote one more body to the box than you might normally, just to be sure that you get one-on-one matchups. Because if you think that the K-State D-backs were there and Klanderman and his secondary coach agree with you, I like that matchup then. I'm going to put my upperclassman on the true freshman in Marvin Mims, and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to take him away. I'm going to take him away. I'm going to try to take Charleston Rambo away, and I'm going to make you beat me with your H-back and your tight end. That's what I would choose to do. Now, are any of these great choices? No, because it's an Oklahoma offense. It's a Lincoln Riley offense. But if it can be put together, it can be picked apart. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, and I think when you bring up, okay, taking the run away versus taking the pass away, something that I'm really keeping my eye on and something I wrote down in kind of my Big 12 recap that I've been doing, I was very interested in the first edition of Joe Klanderman's defensive system, seeing a little bit more of linebackers lined up in the A-gaps for K-State against Arkansas State. That wasn't necessarily something that I remember them doing a ton last year, specifically against Oklahoma. But that is definitely a lineup that can confuse some quarterbacks and offensive linemen. And so if you're Spencer Rattler or if you're Oklahoma's running backs and you see those guys lined up in the A-gaps a little bit more frequently, maybe that's something that these guys have to adjust to. And so when you talk about how they're going to go about trying to shut down some sort of aspect of Lincoln Riley's offense, I want to see what and how Oklahoma's offense handles the potential for those linebackers to not only be lined up in the A-gaps, but come straight downhill and try to be disruptive. Because, again, K-State's only going to have the opportunity to win this football game if that defense finds some way to create some sort of mismatch or create some sort of mistake. And so I'm glad that you brought that up. And for me, that's one way to kind of further your point. How are you going to take it away? Throw some sort of unique schematic lineup like linebackers in the A-gaps.
I want to pivot to the suspensions because I know that you and I have been talking about these things for some time, but to underscore for the folks that haven't been following it forever, Rhamondre Stevenson, Ronnie Perkins, and Trejan Bridges were suspended last year for what was reported to be a positive drug test that is related to marijuana. The rule, anybody would tell you, is archaic, and Riley used those words, or that word, archaic, when it comes to enforcing it and what the penalty is, which is severe, right? It's 50% of the next season or upcoming competitions, right? So for a 12-game season, 6 games. They served a suspension in the Peach Bowl, which you could make an argument. If they're playing in it, maybe it's a different outcome. I would not make that argument, but that's me. And in a 10-game season, right, half of that would be 5, and then we're going to go with 4 because they already did the 1 for the Peach Bowl. So Riley was asked earlier this week if he expected to get Ronnie Perkins or Trejan Bridges or Rhamondre Stevenson back before the Texas game. And he said he did not know, and that at this point, he's no longer interested in whether or not their suspensions get reduced. He's more interested in seeing the rule changed because I think also he made a good point here. Only a handful of teams get tested at all in a year because you only get tested in bowl preparation, and there's not that many bowl games that people would test for. Peach Bowl, college football playoff, makes a lot of sense there. So I'm going to ask you, Colin, how do you feel about the suspensions? And do you think that Riley is right to just say, we're going to continue to work as if those guys can't help us during games, but obviously are able to help us in practice?